The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are simply that, opinions. All are presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Sensitive topics are discussed. Discretion is advised.
Welcome to Vinnie Politan Investigates. I'm Julia Jenaé, filling in for Vinnie Politan. Thank you for being with us as we look at the aftermath of the killing of 4 University of Idaho students in 2022. And even though the sun has set on this killer's story after his sentencing, the memory of those young lives that were lost lives on. Here's the story. In November of 2022, gruesome killings shocked a quiet college town. One cold morning, 4 University of Idaho students, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, were savagely stabbed to death in their off-campus home. Bryan Kohberger was arrested and charged. An investigation revealed he had studied criminology in grad school. Prosecutors said they had significant evidence: DNA, cell phone records, surveillance video, and a knife sheath. In a twist, Kohberger avoided capital punishment and struck a deal with prosecutors. Now, the quadruple murderer will spend the rest of his life in a maximum security prison in Idaho. At his sentencing hearing, family members of the victims didn't hold back, sharing their grief, their disgust with the defendant, and honoring the 4 innocent young lives lost. Afterward, investigators released a mountain of information, giving us new insight into how the atrocity played out and what they learned about Kohberger's movements. We're continuing to dig into what new details we may be able to learn about out of this tragedy now that the gag order has been lifted. But before this killer was taken off to prison under that new sentence from the judge handed down, 4 consecutive life sentences, the family was able to speak their mind in the form of victim impact statements. Take a listen.
You're nothing, you're a coward. It's not right that you have received life. I pray that you meet your end in the cloak of darkness, burn in hell. You are so beyond human. You're definitely a demon from hell. I truly wish your punishment would be the same death you inflicted on our kids. But I think you will meet some new friends in prison who will be there just to help you. Thumbs up.
And that brings us to the first question in our investigation. What does justice look like for the victims? That's the focus here. These families who are left to live with that memory. And we have someone here to help us answer that question. You just heard him speaking on behalf of his clients, someone who has been a counselor to them, a legal advocate. We have attorney Shanon Gray, who represents the family of the victim, Kaylee Goncalves. Shanon, thank you so much for joining us. It's really a pleasure to be able to speak with you. This has been a long, drawn-out journey for these family members, so I can't think of anyone better to speak on behalf of them because you've been doing that as a spokesperson throughout all of this. When you see that question, what comes to mind? What does justice look like for the victims?
Well, you know, the victims' impact statements were incredible. I mean, Olivia and Steve and Christy and a lot of the family members that were there. I mean, in my 20-some year history of doing criminal defense and prosecution work, I've never seen victim statements like that before, and they were awesome. And I was happy to be a part of it, to be able to read a couple of the statements from one of the aunts and 2 of the grandparents. But that's the beginning of it, I think, a little bit. You know, obviously the family wanted the death penalty because the difference between, you know, the death penalty sentence versus a life in prison sentence is death penalty, you're incarcerated 23 hours a day and 1 hour out. So I think that's probably what they wanted. But this is, you know, I guess the next best thing, if you want to say that at all. So.
Yeah, Shanon, what can you tell us about how they're doing? Because we have been able in the public to understand so much of this story because they haven't been afraid to speak out. They have been very vocal, particularly Kaylee's family, and we saw that on display in this sentencing hearing. But how are they doing? What can you tell us?
There's still a lot of stuff to go through. We have all the discovery that's now being released on the case to kind of get some additional facts, autopsy reports, different things that we're doing and working on. There was a leak during the prosecution of the case that's being followed up on. There's maybe some civil suits. Who knows what it might look like? We really want to take the voice away from BK and put it in the victims' voices. So whatever they have planned, I'm right there with them moving forward to support them in any way.
Okay, you mentioned civil suit, so I have to follow up on that. What may be some of the targets of a civil suit in a case like this where we've got this horrific killing and people are searching for what the lessons could be, what the changes could be going forward? Is that anything of the topic of the potential suits out there?
Well, I think for us, it's, trying to get any kind of media rights that he might have, so he doesn't earn a penny off of this case. So, that's one thing that we've talked about. Other things we really haven't discussed yet. So, it's who knows what will happen, but we really want to make sure we take every power he has away from him. And that's what we're looking forward to moving forward.
I want to take a listen back to some more of those victim impact statements. As you mentioned, Shanon, you read some into the record on behalf of family members of Kaylee Goncalves, and 2 other victims' family members were represented there. Ethan Chapin's family chose not to be there, but let's take a listen back to some of what we heard this week.
Xana was 1 in a million. She was the life of the party. She was also the kindest and funniest person I knew. Everyone loved her because she made everyone feel so loved. Kaylee had the most beautiful, radiant smile. And she was so kind, but also one of the funniest people I've ever known. She loved playing little pranks. And she always had us laughing so hard that we could not breathe. Ethan was the sweetest, most genuine guy. He was always smiling and always making other people smile too. Ethan was the kind of person you wanted around. Maddie was not only one of my best friends, but she was the older sister I would have always wanted. There was no one I looked up to or admired more than Maddie. She was truly a ray of sunshine, and everyone was drawn to her. They were all truly one of a kind, and they will be in our hearts forever and always.
She sometimes asks, how am I supposed to go on when I've lost my favorite person in the world? I felt the same, and we continue to struggle.
When you murdered my daughter, Kaylee Jade Goncalves, you didn't just take her life, you shattered others. You attacked what you could never be, and in doing so, you left a trail of devastation far beyond that house.
Xana didn't get the future she deserved. She won't be the maid of honor at my wedding, the cool aunt to my future children. I'll never hear her laugh or see her light up a room ever again. But I will carry her with me for the rest of my life. I will live in her honor, fight to be the best kind of woman and someone she's proud of, to make sure the world never forgets who she was.
Shanon, these were such moving tributes inside of that courtroom, and you were there for it all. I can only imagine what it was like to feel that inside of the gallery. But there was a moment that got all of our attention, and that's when Kaylee's father, Stephen, when he got up to the podium and he moved the podium to look directly at this quadruple killer, admitted killer. Can you take us back to that moment for you?
Well, the whole, the whole area, the time we were in there, it felt like everyone was united, all the victims' families. And it was highly emotional. And, I knew Steve and Olivia and Christy were going to be giving statements. But, Steve is just how I imagined I would be. He is a old school, just powerful leader of his family. And when he did that, I was cheering on the inside. And I think everybody was. He wanted to make sure that BK knew what he was going to be saying to him was directed at him. And just, powerful words. Olivia had powerful words. Christy did. Randy, Xana's stepdad, wanted to take him out in the woods for 10 minutes. Loved that. It was just, it was a powerful time in there for the families, and you could feel it. You could feel it. It was in the courtroom.
I can imagine. I can imagine. I've been inside a courtroom with the Parkland school shooters victims. And I just remember that this felt different than when it's one family. Of course, there's grief, but when there's those multiple families, it compounds. So I can only imagine these families of four beautiful young people, that it just had to be palpable inside of that courtroom. Were there any restrictions on the family members? Sometimes judges, courtrooms, jurisdictions, they tell them there's certain things they can't say. They have to turn in their statement beforehand to get it approved. Did Idaho have any restrictions at all?
Well, I think every state has some restrictions on the victim impact statements to a certain degree. We talked about it. Judge Hippler had been pretty strict on some of the things that he had done prior to that. So a lot of the families didn't know what they could really say. And I basically told them to say whatever they wanted to. They have a right to say whatever they want to the person that killed their daughter. And I told them I didn't feel Judge Hippler would place any restrictions on that. I felt like Judge Hippler would give them grace and discretion, and he did. He allowed them to say whatever they wanted to say, and I thought that was awesome. And I thought it was very professional and well done by Judge Hippler in allowing the victims' impact statements to go just exactly how they went. Each family had their own kind of version. Some were forgiveness, some were vengeful, some were, a little bit in between. But it was great that they were allowed that grace in the courtroom to say whatever they wanted to, because they have the right to.
Absolutely. And you're right. Every word came through. It ran the gamut in terms of what they wanted to say, but at least it felt like a full release. Thank you for giving us that insight. I have so many more questions for you, Shanon, so if you'll stand by. When we come back, we're going to talk about this question. What do the families want to hear from Bryan Kohberger?
This is probably going to bother everybody, but Bryan, I'm here today to tell you I have forgiven you.
The Court TV podcast will return.
All right, Mr. Kohberger, you have an opportunity to make a statement if you wish to. I take it you are declining.
I respectfully decline.
Well,
No response from this convict. And that's his right to remain silent, but it didn't feel right inside of that courtroom. Not after all of the brutal killings at the hand of this man. Not after it's unexplained, hasn't been shared what his motive is. And then during the sentencing hearing, we heard from a victim's aunt. This is Kim Kernodle's, Anna Kernodle's aunt. And she had a different kind of offer and request of the man who killed her niece.
This is probably going to bother everybody, but Bryan, I'm here today to tell you I have forgiven you, because I no longer could live with that hate in my heart. And for me to become a better person, I have forgiven you. And anytime you want to talk and tell me what happened, get my number. I'm here, no judgment, because I do have answers or questions that I want you to answer.
You heard her there. An offer of forgiveness. It was a rare thing during this sentencing hearing where emotions were running high. And she's also asking a really important question. So that gets us to the next question in our investigation. Let's take a look. What do the families want to hear from Bryan Kohberger? There's not a lot that we've heard from him on the record. And we had a lot of questions that were hurled during this sentencing hearing. Let's take a listen back to what investigators said about the motive and the motive that they were looking for in this case.
Trust us, we wanted that to be the case. We've looked for a link and we have not found one, not one.
We have never, to this date, found a single connection between him and any of the four victims or the two surviving roommates.
The evidence suggested that there was a reason that this particular house was chosen. What that reason is, we don't know. We don't know who the target was, and we're not going to speculate on that up here today. But we can tell you that for whatever reason, Mr. Kohberger chose that residence. Perhaps it's the location, layout, we don't know.
All the evidence shows and tells us that he used a knife, a K-bar knife, and that's a weapon we believe was used to commit all the murders.
Out of respect for the families, that's something that y'all have to get from them. If they wish to share that with you, it'd probably be through them, not through us.
All right, you heard it there. The motive was looked into, but not able to be determined by these investigators. And it seemed that we're still left with more questions than answers. And there's been a wonder of whether or not there's going to be a time at some point that Bryan Kohberger will want to speak. You heard the family attorney, Shanon Gray, tell us that they are working to make sure that this defendant doesn't get any rights to anything if he speaks from behind bars. There are times that we've seen serial killers and people who have done the worst of the worst then reveal details about what happened, either through sharing that with the media or writing a book, getting rights to a movie. It's something that in some jurisdictions isn't allowed. There are laws that keep people from gaining any pecuniary or financial gain from sharing details. But even the judge in this case said that he hopes that criminologists or people who are trained to understand these kind of minds to investigate more into Bryan Kohberger and what he was thinking. Because this is one of those rare cases where we don't have a lot of signs. There isn't anything that has been shared by officers that could have stopped him prior to this. So I want to take a listen, if we have it, something more from those investigators as they were being asked questions during this press conference that really was new for us. The gag order kept everyone from being able to speak during these 2.5 years since the killing in 2022. So they were very open with reporters in speaking about what they have learned and what they had to hold back.
We respect the families. We realize that we had tough decisions to make, and we made them, but we did not make them in a vacuum. As I said in court today, we reached out to the families, we asked their thoughts, we listened to what they had to say. We accept and recognize that not everybody agrees with the decision we made. We recognize that we could have said, well, in order for us to move forward, we want a factual allocution, but I have to be perfectly candid. I don't believe that there's anything that would come out of his mouth that would be the truth. I don't believe that there's anything that would come out of his mouth that would be anything other than self-serving, and I don't believe there's anything that would come out of his mouth that would not further victimize the families. And so that just simply wasn't a factor. We made our decision based on our assessment of law and the facts. We made our decision based on being able to obtain accountability and certainty, not just for the victims' families, but for the communities, for the state.
I won't stand here and give you what you want. I won't offer you tears. I won't offer you trembling. Disappointments like you thrive on pain, on fear, and on the illusion of power. And I won't feed your beast. Instead, I will call you what you are. Sociopath, psychopath, murderer. You didn't win. You just exposed yourself as the coward you are. You're a delusional, pathetic, hypochondriac loser who thought you were so much smarter than everybody else.
You're not that good at anything. You couldn't secure a job. You couldn't get along with others. You couldn't even get a female to look in your direction. All because you are pathetic. While I'm disappointed the firing squad won't get to take their shots at you, I'm confident that the men in prison will have their way with you in more ways than one. You will finally get what you wanted, physical touch. Just probably not how you were expecting it.
Here with us to discuss, we have researcher and author of The New Evil, Dr. Kerry Buchado with us. Thank you so much for joining us. Tell me about if you have seen situations where families are able to speak to someone who has done the worst of the worst to their family members and why it's so important for them.
Well, I think that when people are dealing with grief, they go through stages. And for some people, there's a kind of anger phase. For some people, there's a depression phase, a denial phase, an acceptance phase, etc. And people are at different places. And the trial, which normally would have allowed a gradual acceptance of the facts of the situation was taken away from these individuals. They were rushed into having to suddenly and abruptly accept a terrible truth. And I think what you see sometimes is people who are absolutely furious and feel that they can't be there in the way they wanted to be. Through every minute of this process, be there for somebody they might feel they weren't there for in a moment when a horrible thing happened to them because they couldn't be. And yes, this is something that I have seen previously. Absolutely.
We're going to bring back in attorney Shanon Gray, who represents the family of victim Kaylee Goncalves. And we played some of the aunt of Xana Kernodle saying she wanted to speak to the defendant in this case. Is there something that the Goncalves family wants to hear from him, or are they done?
Well, I mean, I think everybody wants answers, obviously, but who can tell whether what he says is going to be the truth or a lie? You know, our goal now is to silence him as much as we can, to make sure that, you know, whatever he says to anybody, right, is going to be self-serving from here on out. We know that that's the case. And we want to try to silence that as much as we can. We want to try to take anything we can away from him moving forward. And the family, you know, obviously wants answers, but who knows if they're going to get the truth or a lie. So it's better just to move on and do the things that we need to do. So,
Shanon, a follow-up to that. I know that your clients were very outspoken about their disappointment in this plea deal. Were there any things that they were asked about to include? There have been many who have wondered if the prosecution could have demanded an allocution, demanded to know where the murder weapon is. Did any of that happen in the process of the prosecution sharing with the families that they would be offering him this deal?
Yeah, that was part of the problem, is that, you know, we heard on a Friday, we had a meeting with him on a Friday before the Sunday offer that came across. And really the mention of a deal was really minimal, and maybe 30 seconds of whether we would like a deal or whatever it is. Didn't talk about the content of it or anything like that, or what would be included in it or anything like that. You know, I think that's really one of the things that the prosecution, when they've kind of been putting it out there, that they spoke with all the families thoroughly and got our input, because they didn't really get the Goncalves' family input, because those are things we would have asked for. You know, you want answers. And, you know, I find it kind of disheartening that, you know, especially Bill Thompson will kind of say, well, you know, we can't make him do that. Yeah, you can. You can say either it's part of the plea offer, and if you don't want to take the plea offer, then we'll go to trial and we'll try to get the death penalty on you. So you either agree to those terms or you don't agree to those terms. So they'd had the power. I just don't think that they put it in there because it was more of an easy way out. Just plead to all the charges. We don't have to say anything. You know, those kinds of things. So I've been a prosecutor. I put things in there all the time that I want out of a plea deal. I've had prosecutors put things in with me, certain things that they want out of the offer and the settlement of the case. And we either agree to them or we go to trial on it, period, end of sentence. You have all the power as the prosecution, especially when you have a defendant that wants to plead in some way and doesn't want to go through a trial and doesn't want to get the death penalty, which we felt there was a strong enough case to get that. So, you know, it's kind of kicking the can when they say that they didn't have the power to do that, when really, if they had put those conditions in the plea offer, you plead to all counts, you're going to get life sentences, and you also have to do this. And if he says, well, I'll plead to everything, but I won't tell you this, then I'd say, well, then the offer's off the table. Have a great day. We'll see you in a couple weeks, period. So they've been, you know, really, it bugs me as an attorney that they say that they didn't have the power to do that, right? We didn't do those things. And they could have said, tell us where the murder weapon is. Tell us what happened on this. Tell us your motive, you know, any kind of things that they wanted to do. Sit down with us in a private meeting prior to the plea itself. If we find that meeting is sufficient to answer the questions that we're going to relay to the family, then we'll move forward with the plea, period. That's what they could have added.
Shanon, I just want to ask you real quick before we have to go to a break. I know Dr. Gary Brachado is staying with us, and we have to say goodbye to you, Shanon. But if you can tell me in 30 seconds, how can the public help these families support the family going forward?
I think just always keeping the memories of the children alive. You know, don't feed into a story or a movie or a Netflix or something that comes out about BK. Let these guys disappear in anonymity. We are all too concerned with what happened and why they did it and these kind of tiny details. And if a family can move on, then the general public can move on. So I would say if there's a book that comes out from BK, if there's a movie that comes out from BK, if there's anything that comes out, you don't go see it. You don't buy it. You don't do any of that stuff. You just focus on the victims and the victims' families and how you can support them moving forward. And maybe that'll change the narrative moving forward when you have these types of cases.
Shanon, thank you so much for being with us. Our condolences and hearts are with these families. We have a lot more ahead as we continue to break down what has happened in this case and what the killer said to authorities.
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
Welcome back to Vinnie Politan Investigates. I'm Julia Jenaé in for Vinnie Politan. A lifted gag order is shedding new light on a case that gripped the nation. A community in Moscow, Idaho, was grieving the loss of 4 University of Idaho students who had been stabbed inside of their home. It was unexplained, and then it led to a nationwide search for a killer. Here's the story. Bryan Kohberger was given multiple sentences for the brutal murders of 4 University of Idaho students, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xander Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. Investigators say they were stabbed early one cold November morning in 2022 in an off-campus house. The grim discovery led to a major criminal investigation in the quiet college town of Moscow. Prosecutors said strong evidence tied Kohberger to the crimes. A knife sheath left at the scene, plus location data and surveillance video. His alibi raised questions. Everything was building towards a colossal trial. But before that began, the two sides reached a deal, and guilty pleas eliminated the chance of a death sentence. After that, victims' family members let out their emotional responses to the outcome, face-to-face with the killer. And investigators have released hundreds of new documents shedding light on the man behind the murders. When this suspect was arrested, nothing was released about what he may have said while in custody. So during that pending trial and a gag order keeping everything under wraps, public records requests were able to uncover that this suspect had been pulled over about a month before the November 2022 slayings of those 4 University of Idaho students. Here's a look at the body camera of this suspect inside of his vehicle.
Yeah, there was a little bit of confusion with speeding because someone had stopped. I wasn't sure what they were doing, and then they put on their light to turn. So I thought that maybe they were letting me go through.
Oh.
Did you see that?
No.
I feel like right before I made the turn, there was someone who made a right. They didn't have their, their signal on, so I wasn't sure if they were just waiting.
Now that we have hundreds of documents that have been released by the police after that sentencing of this quadruple murderer, it brings us to the next question in our investigation. What has Bryan Kohberger said to authorities? Now that we have more information, let's talk about it. Here to help us answer this question, we have clinical and forensic psychologist, researcher, and author of The New Evil, Gary Bucato, with us, and Gary Hughes. He's host of true crime YouTube channel Gray Hughes Investigates. So good to have you both on. Let's first take a look at something that we got in that document dump from the Moscow Police Department, where we have Idaho State Police Lieutenant Darren Gilbertson, and he's talking to Kohberger after they arrested him. And here's what the report says. The Detective Gilbertson then asked Kohberger what led him down the road of becoming a professor. Kohberger stated it was because he loved being in college and stated knowledge was far more important to him than money. He added the WSU had a good program to study under, and then said, you guys know all about this, more than likely. He then began to speak about the beauty of the environment and its relationship to God and a higher power. The detective says we spoke about this for some time. He said that he was raised Christian, but was always a skeptic, except when he was confronted with the beauty of the natural world. And he was asked if he had ever been to the Pacific Northwest before coming to WSU, and Kohberger said he had not. Dr. Bucato, what are you learning from hearing about what his words were to the authorities?
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, it comes across like an individual that, in a masterful way, managed to evade sharing very much information beyond basically saying, here's some superficial information about me. I question authority. I take an intellectual approach to things. There was a little bit of sort of trying to appeal to their own intelligence and say, well, you know, you've probably already heard that before, you know, that kind of thing. And it's a kind of a control mechanism where he manages to be immune to the pick locks that interviewers will use to try to get in there. This is especially interesting when we think about that he has been described as having autism. I am not here to question that diagnosis, but it is interesting to think about that is not something we would expect to see in an individual that was on the spectrum. We would expect to see difficulty navigating that kind of thing. This is almost masterfully evading answering things you don't want to, and presenting yourself as somebody who was raised a certain way, has spiritual beliefs, has a certain moral compass, takes an intellectual approach. I think that in a lot of ways, he handled that quite remarkably in terms of telling nothing.
Yeah, Gary, to Dr. Bucato's point, by the time these investigators then asked about the actual murders and the crimes, that's when he starts to walk it back and then says he has knows that he has a constitutional right to a lawyer. What do you think about their approach now that we are getting this new information?
Well, I think they wanted, like, Kohberger to make the first move, you know, have him be the one that starts talking. But Kohberger was just kind of playing a game with them, you know, like they kept trying to tell him that, you know, he was using the Fifth Amendment, like he doesn't have to, you know, his right to have an attorney. And they kept saying, well, we're not going to tell you anything. Well, once he asked for an attorney, they didn't want to continue to tell him anything. And then he kept saying, well, I mean, maybe I'll still talk to you. I'm just, well, you said you wanted an attorney. Well, I don't know. I want to know what you know. I mean, he wanted to know badly what the cops knew, and they just weren't going to give it to him after he asked for an attorney. I mean, I think all the part where he was talking about, you know, Kohberger began to speak about the beauty of the environment and his relationship to God and a higher power. I mean, what a joke. I mean, that guy, I mean, he was in there trying to sell that he was some, you know, had these other higher beings. He cared about his dog and his parents and, you know, and he was just trying to sell that so that the cops might think of him differently. It was just a bizarre conversation. I'll tell you what, though, it'd be interesting to see the actual transcript. I mean, this is just a summary, and I'm sure it was way more in depth. And I'm sure Dr. Bucato there would have a much better time analyzing that than a summary here.
That is true. And we don't have any recording of it. I would imagine, Dr. Bucato, that there would be some kind of recording if this was the kind of manhunt that no doubt every step of the way they were getting a record of what was happening. But your thoughts on that part of what Gary raised, or Gray rather raised, that he asked about his parents, he asked where his dog was, but then went back into, I need to speak to my attorney.
Well, I think that one of the central themes I think we're going to discover is very important in the story of Bryan Kohberger is this idea of a double life, the fragmentation of the self into this pro-social kind of, you know, a person that is working at a university, is going to be anti-crime and is intelligent and was raised Christian and loves his family and loves the dog. And then this other side of him that is profoundly manipulative and is secretly watching, as we now know, disgusting, violent pornography, having sexualized fantasies that are outrageous, having purchased a blade, obviously with a fantasy of killing someone many months before there was even a victim cast in that fantasy. And I think we have to picture him also getting seduced by the lives of certain offenders like Ted Bundy, identifying with them, seeing himself fragmenting in that way. And when we arrive here, he's got all of that in the back of his mind and is basically saying, let's put the public persona on. But then at the end of the day, when it gets to a place where, his intelligence comes into question and his rights and his knowledge of the law, his ego always takes over, and you start to get glimmers of that masterful, manipulative character that comes out from behind that pro-social mask. And those glimmers, it's the first time in this you really start to see this guy, that has this kind of scheming, calculating, manipulative mind in that moment in this interview.
Gray, you've been digging into this case for years now on your YouTube channel. Has anything surprised you about what we've learned post-sentencing?
Well, there's a lot of information that's come out in terms of the crime scene. I think it's even worse than we had thought. That he absolutely just went nuts on the two women that tried to fight back. He absolutely attacked them with a ferocity that shows what a monster he is. And one of the other things that I found the other day was that there was a witness at 5:30 p.m. on the drive, up Highway 195 near Johnson, where he saw a white vehicle pulled over next to this tree. And then when law enforcement went out and checked, the earth there had been disturbed. And that's exactly the time frame that his phone pinged from 5:32 to 5:36. He turned his phone on for a 4-minute window and then turned it off. And then it was turned off all the way until 8 o'clock. So that time frame, it makes you wonder if he was either retrieving an item or buried an item, let's say after 6 in the morning when he called his parents, until 9 before he took off to go to Moscow. Maybe there was a time frame where he drove down there and buried something or something. I mean, it's really pretty amazing that this individual saw the car parked there, and then there's disturbed earth when the police went and checked.
So much hindsight now that we're able to see looking back, and so many things still a mystery. Gray Hughes, thank you so much for being with us. Dr. Mercado is sticking around. Still to come, what are inmates saying about Bryan Kohberger?
A faceless coward breached the tranquility of 6 beautiful young people and senselessly slaughtered them. 4 of them.
This is the Court TV Podcast.
Welcome back to Vinnie Politan Investigates. We are continuing our deep dive into the aftermath of the sentencing of the killer of 4 University of Idaho students. Bryan Kohberger is now going to be transferred from his county jail that he's been in pending a trial that never happened to an Idaho Department of Corrections cell block.
In my view, the time has now come to end Mr. Kohberger's 15 minutes of fame. It's time that he be consigned to the ignominy and isolation of perpetual incarceration. I remand the defendant to the custody of the Idaho State Board of Corrections for to be imprisoned in an appropriate facility and execution of the sentence where he will remain until he dies.
And now that he is going from jail to prison, that gets us to our final question in our investigation. What are inmates saying about Bryan Kohberger? We're learning a lot more about what those cellmates may have observed. Here to help us with our investigation, we have still with us Dr. Kerry Brucato, and also joining us, we have creator and host of the Grizzly True Crime YouTube channel, Gisela Kay is with us. Great to have you both on. Gisela, I want to read for you something that we have learned from the documents about the inmates who were with Bryan Kohberger when he was behind bars initially. And it says that one of those inmates says that Kohberger quickly became annoying because of his habits behind bars. The inmate told detectives that Kohberger would wash his hands dozens of times each day and would spend 45 minutes to an hour in the shower. This detective asked the inmate if Kohberger slept at night. And they told him that Kohberger would be awake almost all night and would only take a nap during the day. Said that he could hear Kohberger moving around all night, which also annoyed him. Gisela, your thoughts?
Well, I would love to know what the inmates are saying about him now that he's at the Idaho Maximum Security Institution. Can you imagine? Because I'm sure they would know about him. However, that statement that you just read is from when he was in the Latah County Jail, which was from January 4th of 2023 until September 15th of 2024. After that, he was moved to the Ada County Jail. So really, in all these newly released documents, there's only one inmate that we've heard from. I'm sure there's going to be more that eventually will come forward. And it actually sounds, ironically, very similar to how other people described him. It's on form, true to form. He's awake at night. He's washing his hands a lot, which goes into his diagnosis, apparently, of obsessive compulsive disorder. They said he went hiking at night, previous friends. So the inmate's saying he's awake all night. He's, moving around. It sounds just like him. So I wasn't actually too surprised to read that.
Dr. Mercado, what do you think he's going to be like as a prisoner? We're hearing about what he was like in jail, but you got to be picking up on some things from this statement from his fellow inmate.
Well, I think one of the interesting things about people with certain problematic personalities and obsessional qualities is that you're pretty much going to see the same thing in a patterned way playing out everywhere. You could put this guy on a cruise ship, in a car full of people, in a school, in a job setting, in a jail, and in every place he goes, it's going to be exactly the same story. He's going to drive everybody up the wall with his behaviors that are compulsive and meticulous, probably condescending to people, probably a know-it-all, etc., because he cannot help himself. It's very clear that there's a compulsiveness to this, and it seems to lead to his isolation. The tragedy for this character is that as he's sitting around fantasizing that he's going to become some sort of suave, chameleon-like Ted Bundy character, he clearly idolized Bundy, he couldn't have done that on his best day. The reality is that at baseline, he was just too weird and incapable of saying no to these compulsive aspects of himself, which would alienate him everywhere he goes. As the Freudians say, character's destiny.
Gisela, I want to ask you about the incident where the one time he was aggressive was when he thought someone was talking about his mother. How do you think he's going to fare behind bars with a situation like that?
Oh, very interesting and very dangerous inmates in there. There's about 550 inmates, and 150 of those or so where he is now are lifers. So if they talk badly about his mom, I don't know how it's going to go based just on that one incident. And I wonder if he's shown that before. So what the inmate said was, "You suck," at the TV while watching sport. And Kohberger came aggressively up to the bars, apparently, according to this inmate, and said, "Are you talking about me or my mom?" And he said, "No, I'm talking about the sport on the TV." He said, "Oh, okay." And then he backed down. So that's an interesting streak he showed there.
It really is, especially when we know everything that he was accused and now convicted of. That's all the time that we have for, but thank you to this incredible panel that we've had, Gisela Kay and Dr. Gary Buccato. We appreciate it. This is one of those cases that has just gripped the hearts of so many people. And there are times with these horrific cases that there are lessons that are learned or policies and protocol that gets changed. But even with the clarity of hindsight in this one, it doesn't seem to be a case that has that. This is a killer that came with next to no warning signs. But one heartfelt lesson comes from Ethan Chapin's mother, who said that she's grateful that their family spent so much time with Ethan, and she urged everyone to spend all the time they can with their loved ones. That time is precious and something you can't get back. Hear from us at Vinnie Politan Investigates. Thank you for being with us. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.
There you have it. If you want to see more in-depth reporting on the latest true crime stories, you can see me every weeknight, 8 p.m. Eastern on Closing Arguments. Thank you so much for downloading. And as always, please don't forget to hug the kids.
This podcast is a production of Court TV. Go to CourtTV.com for more content, trials on demand, and to find out how to watch Court TV in your area.